My topic is the Czech concept of East Central European integration. First, I must sorry, I have a health problem, but unfortunately, I have to speak as a co-author of book today. Also, first section, first part, is the circumstances of modern national building. The creation of the modern Czech national identity is the result of the Czech national movement, usually referred to as the national revival, národní obrození in Czech language. It began at the end of the 18th century and created a modern nation by the middle of the 19th century. It encountered mainly German dominance in Central Europe and Austria, when many Germans still considered the Czech lands a natural part of the planned united Germany during the 1848 revolution. Czech national movement, however, in contrary to the Slovaks, for example, had a lean of the old tradition, a tradition of the Czech state and the Czech crown, and the numerical predominance of the Czech population, and until the 17th century, usually even the political dominance. In addition, there was a certain preference of the Czech language until the defeat of the estates in 1620. So it is possible to consider the medieval Czech nation and the nation state, unlike typically Hungary, where lived many different language groups dominated by Latin until modern times. In Central and Eastern Europe, the occasional manifestations of national feeling among Czechs were already quite exceptional in the Middle Ages. Sharp anti-German attacks are already found in the so-called Dalimil's Chronicle, Dalimilova Chronika in Czech, which was probably completed after 1314. Since the settlement of the Slavs in the 6th century, Czechs, or formerly Czech-speaking Slavs, have always been numerous in the Czech lands. However, the Czech lands have basically been free since 9th century, but another time quite centralized part of Confederation of States. It was long the empire, also the Holy Roman Empire of German nation, until 1806, but also the part of the Habsburg monarchy since 1526 to 1918. In them, the population speaking German dialects predominated, which from the 13th century until 1947 also formed a quarter to a third minority of population in the Czech lands. The minority issue of Germans in the Czech lands was one of the key elements of development from the 13th century until the tragic end after the Second World War. However, it cannot be overlooked that more significant national conflicts did not begin until 1448. In other times, the religious division of the population played a much more crucial role. In the past, the Czech or Czechoslovak state has been involved in efforts for international cooperation and integration processes. It should be added that the difficult international situation of state, often surrounded by several hostile neighbors, as between the world wars, usually contributed to this. In the old days, we can mention mainly the project of King George of Poděbrady, in Czech Jiří z Poděbrad, the king as a Czech king elected 1458. The project was prepared in the years 1462 to 1464 with the help of foreign experts, such as mainly Antonio Marini of Grenoble. The aim was to create an association of Christian states to maintain peace. These attempts to this day have a considerable response, and even the United Nations claim its legacy. It is necessary to realize that the first real international organization to address these issues was not established until 1919, also in the 20th century. Next section. The Czech concepts of Slavic integration in the long 19th century, also between 1789 to 1918. From 1926, the Czech lands were part of the Habsburg Empire. If an integration was considered, it was usually based on the transformation of the monarchy into the protector of small, especially Slavic nations, so-called Austroslavism, Austrian Slavism, or exceptionally, efforts to cooperate with powerful Russia, also so-called Pan-Slavism. In the conditions of then political weak Czech nation, it was difficult to imagine, for example, independence and cooperation with, for instance, France or Britain. The key question of the national existence of the Czechs, but also some other Slavic nations, Slovaks, Croats, partly Poles, but also Hungarians, was their position within Austria, originally the Habsburg Empire established in 1526. In the middle of the 19th century, the monarchy had a population of about 36 million, of which 8 million were Germans, 5 million Hungarians, and 50 million Slavs, including 4 million Czechs and 2 million Poles. Yes, sorry. The more capable representatives of the Slavic nations realized that possible independence would be quite risky in difficult European conditions. Especially after 1878, the Balkans showed the risks of disintegration of the multinational empire, and the word Balkanization was, and still is, pejorative for experts. The Habsburg Empire protected itself mainly from the Turks and the danger of Islam for the first 2 centuries, which at the end of the 17th century lost its importance. In the 19th century, however, 2 fundamental Threats appeared, which persisted even after the changes caused by the First World War, and in fact still exist today. From the West, there is a risk of unification of the very large German nation, which has culture-dominated Central Europe, and many nations then feared assimilation. From the East, it's the domination of Russia. It is undeveloped and a hard absolutism regime, while Central Europe is liberalizing, and there is also culture difference due to Orthodox religion. Concerns about German nationalism and Russian backwardness and absolutism led many politicians in the monarchy to support the state since the 1814s. They were mainly members of the Slavic nations. Therefore, we talk about Austroslavism. Austria should become a mainstay of small Slavic nations. The most significant development of Austroslavism was in the Czechs. Another idea that had support in the Czech environment was Panslavism. Awareness of the existence of a group of Slavic nations was related to the development of linguistics in the 18th century. The success of Russian troops, which repeatedly passed through the Czech lands during the Napoleonic Wars, played an important role for the public. To understand the appeal of Panslavism, it is necessary to be aware of the situation in Europe in the first half of the 19th century, when modern nationalism was emerging. Also, very specific situation. Next section, period between world wars. The disintegration of the traditional state system existence since 1526, and in some elements even older, significantly complicated the situation in Central Europe. When it was spoken pejoratively about Balkanization, also the problem of small, mutual hostile states, as was usual in the Balkans, especially after 1878. More capable politicians were well aware of this problem and sought to develop international cooperation, both global and regional. Interwar Czechoslovakia was mainly economically, but to some extent also in population, one of the largest successor states. Perhaps even more important was its political stability. Despite the usual permanent political bickering in the only democracy that remained in the region, the foreign policy of the state remained in the hands of its creators. Almost until their death, Tomáš Garrigue Masaryk died in 1937, and Edvard Beneš, thus in 1948. Also, the first and second presidents remained key figures. Beneš has been a key creator of foreign policy since the time of the foreign resistance during the First World War. In the interwar era, he, also Beneš, became the longest-serving Minister of Foreign Affairs in the world. And even as president, he controlled foreign policy, of Czechoslovakia. Masaryk was the creator of theoretical concepts of international relations, while Beneš rather adhered to real politics. Already during the exile, during the First World War, Masaryk prepared a fundamental publication, New Europe, in Czech Nová Evropa, where he justified the fight against Austria-Hungary. Masaryk recommended the transformation of Europe into a federation of democratic states. However, such a drastic reconstruction was hardly realistic at the time, so he also supported less radical international efforts. Czechoslovakia, as a state closely tied to the conditions created after the First World War, supported the first real international organization that was to ensure stability, the League of Nations. One of the key organizations initiating later European integration was the Pan-European Union, also Pan-Europa, founded in 1922 or 1924 on the estate of Richard Coudenhove Kalergi in Poběžovice near Domažlice. Poběžovice near Domažlice, it is in southwest Bohemia. Richard Coudenhove Kalergi, of Austrian-Japanese origin, was one of the main supporters of European integration, having Czechoslovak citizenship and a specific support from Prague. At the beginning, he was a young and completely unknown politician, so perhaps already in 1919, he met with President Tomáš Masaryk, whom he wanted to become the Washington of United Europe. So Washington of United Europe. Masaryk greatly appreciated his activities, but believed that the time was not yet right for them. He recommended him to important personalities, secured him by Czechoslovak diplomatic passport, but refused personal leadership. Since the foreign resistance during the First World War until 1948, Czechoslovakia's foreign policy was dominated mainly by Edvard Beneš, Minister of Foreign Affairs, and from 1935, President. He was a supporter of European stability and a promoter of collective security, focused on France and later on the Soviet Union. Other concepts did not stand a chance, whether it was the efforts of Karl Kramář. Kramář was first prime minister, to defeat the Bolsheviks and cooperate with liberated Russia, or the efforts of the first Slovak as prime minister in 1935 to 1938, Milan Hoxha, also Hoxha, to the so-called Danube Federation with Austria and Hungary cooperating with Italy. Next section, next part. After the Second World War and during the socialism, the Second World War created fundamentally different conditions in many ways, which were crucial for the Czech lands. The Soviet Union penetrated Central Europe, so that ties to Russia Pan-Slavism, so-called Pan-Slavism, which in the 19th century were more of a theory against the power of Austria and its allied Germany, have now become reality. The original ideas during World War II, supported by President Beneš and his exile in London, were that Czechoslovakia would become a kind of bridge between the West and the Soviet Union. Bridge between West and Soviet Union. But within a few years, Czechoslovakia became a satellite of Moscow, and the world disintegrated into separated blocks. During the communist regime of 1948 to 1989, Czechoslovakia was part of the Soviet bloc and as a Soviet satellite. As an analogy of Western European integration, organizations in the Soviet bloc also emerged, but their real significance was minimal for a long time, because the integration here, thus is rather Soviet dominance, functioned even without contractual obligations. This was especially the case with the military organization of the so-called Warsaw Pact, which was always, in fact, subject to Soviet command. The development of the economic organization was more complicated. Also, the Council for Mutual Economic Assistance. Last section, last part, the situation after 1989. The democratization of Eastern Europe, especially in 1989, marked one of the key milestones in the world history. Integration into political, military, and economic structures was difficult, which meant complex internal discussions and had fundamental strategic aspects, as it ran into Moscow's interests. While joining the European Union had quite public support in the former Soviet bloc, but faced difficult economic conditions, joining North Atlantic Treaty Organization was a major political problem. In the Czech Republic in the K19s was a major advantage of the majority interest in the society to return to Europe, as it was referred, symbolized by joining Western European organizations. And the situation today, the inhabitants of the Czech Republic are among the most Eurosceptics in the European Union. In particular, more pushful European Union plans, such as environmental or refugee friendless in 2015, are causing agitation or ridicule or outrage in majority of society. Foreign policy of the state is typical for its prevailing support of the United States and Israel. However, many influential politicians, such as former President Václav Klaus and current President Miloš Zeman, also former President and current President, are considered supporters of Russia or even China. Also, the situation is complicated. Also, this is the end of my talking. Thank you.